It's time to talk about Bigben. Hi, welcome to my channel. Today we will explore the history of the Bigben clock tower, more commonly known as the Elizabeth Tower, since 2012. Bigben is the nickname of the Great Bell, which is the largest bell inside the clock tower. He wanted a new clock tower to replace the existing medieval clock tower called the Clock of Charles V, built in 1368. He felt that this old clock tower did not do justice to the grandeur of the palace. The first step was to demolish the old medieval clock tower, which began in 1852. In doing so, they accidentally damaged the foundations, causing the whole tower to tilt. Each of the four clock faces has two sets of hands. The larger hand indicates the hours, and the smaller hand indicates the minutes. When the tower was completed in 1859, it was initially called the Clock Tower, but it was soon renamed the Elizabeth Tower in honor of Queen Victoria. The project team was confident that they would be able to complete the construction in time for the fair. However, due to several factors, including the demolition damage to the foundations and the need to reinforce them, this was not possible. Instead, the clock tower was officially opened by Queen Victoria on September 18, nearly 8 years after construction began. By this time, the fair had already taken place, and therefore the symbolic purpose of the tower had already passed. Who at the time was celebrating her 60th year on the throne? It's just that the opposite happened to Bigben. The goal was to build something as big and imposing as the Eiffel Tower, but it didn't quite work out that way. Nonetheless, it remains a cherished part of London's heritage and identity. The success of the tower probably exceeded even the most optimistic expectations of the project team. Please feel free to share your thoughts and any additional information that you may have, and I'll see you next time. It was constructed in 1889 for the 1889 World's Fair, which coincidentally was held in the same year as the original opening of Bigben. Both structures are primarily symbolic and represent national pride. Both structures were controversial when they were built, with many people believing that they were too ugly or would disrupt the skyline. And both structures remain popular tourist attractions today. The idea of building a tall structure to impress visitors at an international fair is exactly the same idea which motivated the construction of Bigben. And the results of these two projects could not have been more different. Not only is it the most famous clock tower in London, it's arguably the most famous clock tower in the whole world, and it continues to be a popular tourist destination today. There are also smaller dials below the main clock face, indicating the seconds. As you can see, there was originally no bell within the tower. But in 1859, the Great Bell, nicknamed Bigben, was added. It is the third largest four-sided bell in the United Kingdom and weighs approximately 13 tons. It's not just a height difference though. If you compare the weight of the Eiffel Tower to the weight of the Bigben clock tower, it's over 17 times heavier. And if you compare the volume, it's over 12 times greater. Bigben was built to be a symbol of London, but it's dwarfed by the nearby Houses of Parliament, which makes it look quite small in comparison. The Eiffel Tower, on the other hand, was built to be an icon of France, and it does exactly that. It dominates the skyline of Paris and is visible from almost everywhere in the city. Its sound can be heard up to 5 miles away on a clear day. So then they had to spend 2 years reinforcing the foundations before any further work could take place. All of the clocks are controlled via a large clock mechanism located at the very top of the tower. This mechanism is still in use today and is considered to be one of the finest examples of Victorian engineering. It's also worth mentioning that the tower contains over 400 steps and no lift was installed until 1988. They started again in 1855 with architect George Gilbert Scott designing a new clock tower. His design was neo-Gothic in style and consisted of a square base with 4 corner turrets and a tall central spire reaching a height of 316 feet or 96 meters. A design was produced by architects James Wyatt and Thomas Hopper, which involved demolishing the old clock tower and replacing it with a new style clock tower, similar to the famous clock tower at the Place de l'Hôtel de Ville in Paris. However, this plan was rejected by Parliament because they were worried that the new clock tower would block the view of the Thames and would cast unwanted shadows on the Commons chamber. But this idea of improving the palace by adding a new clock tower never really went away. However, the whole structure is also sometimes referred to as Bigben too. At this time, Britain was preparing for the 1851 Great Exhibition, also known as the Crystal Palace Exhibition. It was an international fair showcasing the latest technologies and innovations from around the world, sort of like a World's Fair. And it was held in a purpose-built structure made mostly of glass called the Crystal Palace in Hyde Park. The exhibition was intended to be a celebration of peace and international cooperation. However, it was also very much a competition between nations, a bit like today's World Expo, and Britain felt pressured to put on a good show for all the foreign dignitaries and royalty who would be in attendance. The tower is located on the north end of the Palace of Westminster, which is where the House of Commons and the House of Lords meet. This makes it a prominent landmark of London and an iconic part of British culture. We'll look at its construction in the mid-19th century and how it was planned to be a proper symbol of London, just like the Eiffel Tower is for Paris. The project was driven by a desire to impress visitors attending a major international fair and best the French at their own game. And we'll see how these lofty ambitions led to some pretty disastrous consequences. So let's begin with an overview of what Big Ben actually is and where it is located. The idea of having a clock tower at this location goes back to 1809 when it was suggested by Sir Benjamin Hall, who was at the time the master of the clock at Westminster, and in 1854 it was brought back by the newly appointed Commissioner of Works, Sir Charles Barry. A new clock tower was again proposed to enhance the entrance to the Palace of Westminster, and would also help to attract visitors to the fair. This is now the famous clock face. The clock face is made out of white stone and is 22 feet or 6.7 meters in diameter. Inside the tower, there are 5 main clocks, one at each corner turret, and one at the top of the central spire. Construction took 4 years to complete and cost a total of £16,500, which in today's money would be well over £1 million. But as we mentioned earlier, the primary reason for building this clock tower was to impress foreign visitors during the 1851 Great Exhibition. Nonetheless, the clock tower was a success in that it became a prominent landmark of London and a symbol of the city. However, there is another clock tower, which may be even more famous than Big Ben, and that is the Eiffel Tower in Paris. Both structures were built at roughly the same time, and both countries wanted to beat the other at their own game. However, despite these similarities, the Eiffel Tower is much taller than Big Ben at 1,063 feet or 324 meters. Compared to Big Ben's 316 feet or 96 meters, this is not to say that Big Ben is a failure, or that it doesn't deserve its place among the most famous landmarks in the world. So there you go. That is the story of how Big Ben went from being a simple clock tower to becoming one of the most famous landmarks in the world.